educating teens about the way media impact politics and politics impact the media is a complex matter. How do you do that?
So we at Chat UK, we engage young people in media's influence on politics via primarily our political literacy course. So we run a political literacy course and a media literacy course in secondary schools and colleges across the UK. We've run them in just over 700 schools and colleges, or with schools, secondary schools. And the way we do this is essentially via our programme, which has three main units in it. Unit 1 deals with local and national government, what's a councillor, what's an MP, how does it become a law, the sort of bare bone basics that frankly should already be on the curriculum, but isn't. And then in Unit 2 we deal with media literacy, which is critically analysing information we receive online. And within Unit 2 we then show how that influence and how the media sort of, influences the public debates, comment pieces influence public debate, understanding what comment pieces are, how they can sometimes be misconstrued as journalism, and how that can influence how we vote. And when it influences how we vote, it then influences the entire conversation that happens in Unit 1, which is essentially how our parliament's formulated and how democracy functions.
Mm-hmm. So how media tend to establish the agenda setting, let's say.
Essentially, I think things are definitely changing. I think social media has changed the game massively, where you've got politicians now for the first time being able to communicate directly to voters, which has never really happened before. Sometimes this can be a very good thing, sometimes it can be a terrible thing, because you've got politicians directly spouting their agenda to voters without the critical eye of good journalism. So it kind of has a sort of benefit and drawback approach depending on how you look at it. But it just shows how the sort of new public sphere, which is online, is shaping debate, and that is media. Like we see, The Guardian, The Times, The Sun as media, but we also see social media as media, like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and so on.
Sure. Twice as many young people register to vote to this Thursday's election compared to 2017 elections. And where did they get this new input from families, friends, schools, teachers, or firstly from media and social media?
So you're quite right. Like this election has seen probably the biggest amount of, not just young people, but people in general registering to vote, which is incredible. It's good for democracy. Where it comes from is kind of a question that kind of remains to be seen almost after the election. In my view, I think a lot of it was done by civil society. So, for example, we in all of our schools for this general election, we ran voter registration drives in all of our schools. So within our programme, a lot of it's done online, so each student has their own account that they can go through the programme, and they're still classroom activities, but all their activities and so forth are done online. And we inputted an activity which essentially made them go onto the gov.uk website, made them register to vote, and then take a screenshot of the thank you page,
Amazing.
for lack of a better word, and then upload it onto the platform. And they weren't allowed to carry on with the political literacy course unless they did that, which means that in all the schools that we were in, we got 100% voter registration for all, obviously over 16s. Within that, we also created a drill track with Drill Minister, to getting young people that were from sort of marginalised communities engaged with the vote, but more important than that, before that, obviously registered to vote. This track ended up on Mixtape Madness, which has just under 1 million subscribers. It ended up on SBTV, it ended up on Uniland Sound, and it also ended up getting attacked by the Daily Mail, which for us is a win. I mean, it's the Daily Mail. On top of that, you had other organisations like My Life, My Say running decaf sessions across the UK, engaging with slightly older demographics of young people. You had Vote for Your Future, who were running online registration drives. But I think the fundamental reason why young people are engaging now is because of how pertinent all of these issues around climate change, mental health, austerity have become for the next generation. I think young people more than ever now have realised that actually our future's in jeopardy.
They are the most affected. Yeah.
They are by far the most affected, because they're the ones, to put it into Brexit terms, they're the ones that are going to have to live with the consequence the longest, and yet they're the ones that didn't turn out in 2016.
Absolutely.
And they saw essentially their future ripped away from them by people that are not even going to be alive, to be perfectly frank, for most of the consequences. And I think that really woke
Mm-hmm.
a lot of young people up, and I think a lot of it is to do with that.
And you mentioned the Daily Mail earlier. Just a question: why the Daily Mail attacked the video? No vote, no voice, register or vote. Shout Out UK has made with the drill minister. To what purpose do you attach you?
To create conflict. The Daily Mail is, and I say the word newspaper very loosely, like they have been discredited by Wikipedia, they've been discredited by NewsGuard, they've been discredited by a number of different fact-checking and media literacy websites. And they thrive on this kind of hate content. And what was ridiculous about that article that went out on Sunday, actually, that the content was, so in the article it alleges that drill minister is seen stabbing a politician, which is complete garbage. Like if you see the video,
he holds a pencil to vote.
Well, he was dancing in one point, but the point where they're referring to the stabbing, so he's apparently stabbing a politician with a pencil, and the video shows, so there's a man in a suit, which is coincidentally me, with his face blurred out, and he's got a ballot paper pinned to his chest. And drill minister's got an oversized pencil, and he can clearly be seen ticking a box. Obviously all the boxes are blank because we're not trying to tell you who to vote for, but it's just show to use the power of the vote. Now the Daily Mail, for some bizarre reason, construed that as him stabbing someone. When we put out a response online, we got a ton of supportive comments. A lot of people attributed to, frankly, racism. Because you're picturing someone and you're trying to portray a certain stereotype just because of the fact that they look a certain way, they talk a certain way, and they act a certain way, and they are in a certain industry, which frankly is appalling, and those journalists should be utterly ashamed of themselves.
And let's get back to this election, and but just let me understand 1 second. This of the Daily Mail is a complex issue. For what the Daily Mail as also an editorial group represented in the UK. And if you had to explain this dynamic of interest behind it, what would you say to a teenager? How would you explain this kind of dynamics to a teenager?
So if we had to explain what happened to us and drill minister to a young person, we'd basically frame it within media bias. Every newspaper, every news network, every post on social media has a bias because everything we do as human beings is linked to a certain preconception of what we view certain things, either positively or negatively. And we all have biases. Like if you were to ask me what dessert you should have this evening, I would say chocolate cake because I like chocolate. That's a bias I have towards a specific dessert. It's a harmless bias, but it's a bias I have. And I think it's about understanding that everyone has biases, and it's important to recognize those biases that you have. And it's important to also recognize that journalists are human beings, and they will also have biases. The two journalists that wrote that Daily Mail piece have a bias towards that genre of music, towards drill minister as an artist, and towards him because of the way he looks like. So they then, rather than promoting the fact that these two rappers were doing something positive with a genre of music that's normally lambasted as being negative, all they could see was their own perceived bias of that situation. And that for me is the way you conceive it. And once you understand that, you can then look at the media in a slightly different lens. It's not about not believing anything that comes out of the mainstream, because that's not true. But it's about having a critical lens so that everything you read, you have a slight pinch of salt and you start to understand, is this the whole truth? And if something triggers you, either makes you very, very angry or very, very happy, then that media network is probably trying to make you feel one of those two things. So it's important to maybe step back a bit, maybe do a bit more research, and then share that bit of content or believe that bit of content. But don't just believe it just for the belief's sake. So healthy criticism and healthy skepticism, I think, is important, especially in the online world that we're living in now.
And In the UK, a major percentage of those who voted for Brexit correspond to 60 plus years old. And this is also the area of readers of the printed newspapers, which undeniably in the UK are from the most part leaning for the Conservative Party. And I mean, this is stats. And do you think this country needs political and media literacy programs also for 60 plus, and not just for teenagers but for elderly or mature elderly?
Dear God, yes, we need political and media literacy for the over 60s. My God, yeah. I mean, yes, definitely. Like we as an organisation, most of our work is done in schools and colleges. However, from January 2020, we're launching a political literacy course online, specifically targeting adults with graphic animation cartoons, with video tutorials and all that kind of stuff. How it will go down, we're not sure. But I think it could not be more important, because the people that are getting tricked by misinformation, by complete false claims online, ironically enough, aren't so much young people. They're the over 60s, the people that don't know how to engage with the internet because they weren't born with the internet. It's not their fault per se, but it's something that they're not used to, whereas young people are pretty much born with a phone in their hand nowadays. It's something that is natural to them. So there's a natural, almost healthy skepticism when young people see something online, whereas for older generations, I mean, even within my family, I see some stuff that my aunts share in Italy, for example, and it's like, why are you sharing that? Why is that on your timeline? So there's that lack of understanding as to how the media works that I think is really imperative. Like if you look at the Brexit argument in 2016, the amount of misinformation that came out of the Leave side was atrocious. And people always say, oh, you should be objective and say Leave and Remain were both as bad. They weren't as bad as each other. That's just factually inaccurate. The Leave side were a hell of a lot worse. And there were things around the £350 million bus claim for the NHS, which was a lie. There was one bit of misinformation that we came across, which apparently the European Union was trying to steal our tea for some reason. There was another one about migration, specifically around migrants, the breaking point adverts and all that kind of stuff. Like, a lot of young people saw through that, because a lot of young people aren't scared of migration, for example. They live in a multicultural society. They understand that people that look different aren't scary. But I think the older generations are not used to that, and the world has kind of moved on, and a lot of people have, from that demographic as well, are still living in the past. And I think a lot of that is because they lack political literacy to understand how this change is actually a positive thing. And also they lack the media literacy to be able to tell what is misinformation, who is trying to deceive you, and how you can fact check for yourself.
Definitely. So you're doing a very important thing next year. Next year on. Good
Fingers
luck.
crossed, touch wood.
Fingers
Thank you.
crossed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.